Have you ever felt like silence was supposed to be weakness? Like if you didn't cry out, post your heartbreak, or chase after someone who walked away, you were somehow losing? That's one of the biggest myths we've been taught, that reacting emotionally is the only way to prove we care, that silence means defeat. But what if that's completely wrong? What if the most powerful thing you can do after being abandoned, ghosted, or discarded is to do nothing at all? What if your quiet, grounded, unapologetic presence says more than any dramatic goodbye ever could? Too often we fall into the trap of over-explaining ourselves to people who stopped listening, waiting for closure that never comes, and measuring our worth based on who stays instead of how we rise. That ends today. Because what if I told you right now that your silence could become the loudest voice in their life? That while you're healing in peace, they're unraveling in the echo of everything they didn't appreciate. That's not just romantic revenge. That's transformation. That's stoicism in action. This isn't about becoming cold or emotionally detached. No, this is about awakening, about reclaiming your power without ever raising your voice, about understanding that when you master your inner world, no one else's chaos can shake you. This message is urgent because too many of us are stuck in emotional loops, begging for someone to value what they already threw away. But once you understand the truth I'm about to share, you'll never approach stoic relationships the same way again. So lean in, because by the time this ends, you won't just feel stronger, you'll be stronger. This isn't the story of heartbreak. This is the beginning of your rise, and what comes next will shift everything. 1. The door that closed without a sound. Sometimes the most powerful decisions we make are the ones we don't announce. No grand exit, no long message thread, no dramatic scene. Just a quiet, definitive decision to no longer participate in what was draining your soul. That's what the door that closed without a sound really means. It's not silence from weakness, it's silence from wisdom. When someone has taken your presence for granted long enough, you learn that love doesn't have to be proven through suffering, that value doesn't increase when you beg someone to see it. You walk away not because you're bitter, but because you've finally reached clarity, and that clarity doesn't come with noise. It comes in the stillness of finally understanding that you were trying to build a bridge for someone who never planned to cross. Think about it. How many times did you hope they'd notice your effort? How many nights did you wrestle with confusion, thinking maybe if you just explained yourself one more time, maybe they'd stay? How many apologies did you offer when you were the one being hurt? The truth is, when you're dealing with someone who benefits from your confusion, your peace will always be inconvenient. That's why when you finally go silent, it shocks them. They expected you to break. They prepared for a storm, a scene, maybe even a final desperate reach. But when they check their phone and there's nothing, when they scroll through your feed and it's calm, not chaotic, that's when reality hits. You didn't slam the door. You closed it quietly, without anger, without a final word, and that silence is what echoes the loudest. There's a weight to doors that close without sound because they weren't shut in rage. They were shut in revelation. You didn't leave to get attention. You left to get your soul back. And now, every time they reach for the comfort, once abused, they're met with nothing, no access, no emotional availability, no loophole. That's where the stoic truth begins to set in. We cannot control others, only ourselves. And when we stop trying to fix what was never ours to hold, we gain everything. They'll go back through old messages. They'll revisit memories like a movie they assumed they had a sequel to. But the theater is closed. The show has ended. You didn't need to declare it. You simply stopped auditioning for a role you no longer believed in. That's the power of a door that closes silently. It removes the drama. It takes back your dignity. It rewrites the narrative, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. And make no mistake, they'll notice. Not at first, because ego is loud. It will tell them you're just being distant, that you'll return, that silence is temporary. But time has a way of stripping away illusions. Weeks pass, the messages never come. You aren't watching their stories. You aren't asking how they are. You aren't feeding the dynamic. That's when confusion turns to regret, because the door didn't close in the middle of a fight. It closed in the calm. And calm is terrifying to someone who thrives on chaos. It says you thought it through. It says you didn't need a reaction. You needed peace. And now that you have it, you won't trade it for conversation. That's the lesson they never saw coming. When they mishandled your loyalty, your consistency, your love, they taught you how to stop offering it. The final goodbye wasn't something you screamed. It was something you lived, day by day, with less energy invested, with fewer words, with more boundaries. The most stoic move you can make isn't cutting someone off. It's choosing yourself so quietly, they don't even realize the door has closed until they're locked out. And what hurts the most isn't that they lost you, it's that they didn't realize it was possible. They were used to the door always being open. They counted on your softness, your patience, your hope. They thought no matter how many times they left, you'd be there. But here's the truth of Stoicism. Nothing is guaranteed, and time doesn't wait for those who waste it. Your energy is a gift, not a guarantee. And once you gave it to yourself instead of them, the balance shifted. You're no longer sitting by the door hoping they'll come home. You're building a new home inside yourself, one they no longer have the key to. That's not cruelty, that's consequence. That's the natural law of cause and effect. And it's something no dramatic argument can teach them, like your silence will. They will search for the crack in the door. They'll test to see if it opens. But when they find it sealed, not out of revenge, but out of peace, that's when the lesson begins. You were never a revolving door. You were a sanctuary, and sanctuaries don't tolerate trespassers. They protect their peace at all costs. So let the door stay closed, not because they aren't worthy of love, but because they didn't treat your love as worthy. And while they sit in the hallway of their own echoes, remember this: you didn't walk away. You just stopped standing in the same place waiting, and now you're free. Not bitter, not broken, not bruised, just free. That's what happens when a door closes without a sound. The world doesn't end. Your story doesn't pause. It begins again, in silence, in strength, in stoic clarity, and that's what they'll never forget. 2. The mirror they can't bear to face. There's a moment that arrives not in noise, but in stillness, a moment when someone who once dismissed your worth finally meets themselves in the quiet aftermath of your absence. And when they look into the mirror, they don't just see who they are. They see who they could have been if they hadn't taken you for granted. That mirror, once ignored, now becomes unavoidable. Because when you walk away with dignity, when you choose healing over chaos, your growth doesn't just change. It confronts them. The silence they hear is no longer just the absence of your voice. It's the presence of your evolution. The reflection they see doesn't carry your forgiveness, your softness, or your patience. It carries consequence, and that's the beginning of a different kind of torment. Not loud, not vengeful, but deeply personal. Have you ever wondered why the person who left begins to watch you more closely after you're gone? Why they suddenly seem more attentive to your updates, more aware of your changes, more haunted by the memories they never made peace with? It's not because they care now. It's because your stillness has become their mirror. When you were there, they avoided that reflection. They distracted themselves with temporary attention, convinced that someone like you was easy to replace. But now, with nothing left to grasp onto, they're forced to see the person they were with you, and more painfully, the person they failed to become. And that contrast, that unbearable recognition, is the truth Stoicism teaches us to accept without flinching. That people don't always reject you because you're lacking. Often, they reject you because they aren't ready to face themselves. In your love, You were the standard, and standards are uncomfortable for people hiding from their own flaws. They didn't avoid you. They avoided their reflection in your consistency, your care, your clarity. And now that you're gone, that mirror hasn't disappeared. It's only gotten clearer. They scroll, they remember, they compare. But what haunts them isn't just losing you. It's realizing you became what they always wished they could. Be stable, honest, whole. While they chased distractions, you built depth. While they ran from connection, you grew roots. And now, every image of you they try to forget reflects back their own unhealed shadow. The mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It shows truth. And when someone who betrayed real love looks into it, they don't see a villain. They see a coward. They see someone who walked away, not because they were strong, but because they were afraid. And fear has a way of following people long after they run. It shows up in failed relationships, in sleepless nights, in moments of regret, no rebound. Kanam, you were once a place of peace, but now you're a benchmark of what they lost. And that comparison is inescapable. Because in Stoic relationships, the past is not to be obsessed over, but it is to be learned from. And when someone fails to learn, life will teach them through repetition. Every new connection will bring them back to the same emptiness they felt when you left. Not because no one else is good enough, but because they weren't good enough to keep what was real. And that's the harshest reflection of all. You're not haunting them, you're not reaching out, but your silence has become their judgment. Every time they try to replace you, they run into the wall of their own unresolved guilt. And the mirror, it gets louder. You were the one who listened without judgment, who loved without conditions, who gave without keeping score. And they treated you like a phase. Now, the mirror won't let them forget. Because when someone looks into the eyes of a person they hurt and sees nothing, no pain, no blame, no longing, just distance, it forces them to confront their own failure. And failure is a teacher no one can ignore forever. That's what Stoicism reminds us. When we focus on mastering ourselves, we stop trying to change others. And in doing so, we become the very thing their ego feared, a person who doesn't need them, who doesn't ask for closure, who doesn't linger, a person who rises. You're not angry, you're not waiting, you're not watching them anymore, and that absence is exactly what brings them back to the mirror, because they're still hoping you'll look back, but you won't. You've already walked past the point of needing them to see you. You see yourself now. You've become the version of yourself they never believed in, maybe even feared. And now they'll avoid your eyes if they ever pass you again. Not because you're a threat, but because you're a reminder of who they were, of what they lost, of everything they didn't have the courage to grow into. That's the true revenge, not spite, not bitterness, but becoming exactly what they couldn't be brave enough to meet. You are the mirror now, and they can't bear to face it. And if you felt the sting of being disregarded, of being unchosen by someone who couldn't handle your light, I want you to remember, their rejection was never about your worth. It was about their readiness. You just happened to be their lesson, and they'll keep repeating that lesson until they're strong enough to face themselves. But you've already passed that test. So if this video speaks to something deep inside you, if you've ever walked away quietly but completely, then like this video and comment number 1 below to let me know you're claiming your peace. And if you want more messages like this, rooted in truth, in strength, in real Stoicism, and the wisdom of Stoic relationships, subscribe now. You're not alone, you're evolving, and this is just the beginning. 3. The spotlight that no longer shines for them. They stood there, center stage in your heart, as if the applause would never fade. Your attention, your love, your loyalty, it surrounded them like light, warm and constant. But now, the spotlight has moved. Not because you stopped caring abruptly, but because you finally realized that love doesn't require performance, and loyalty shouldn't be a solo act. They thought the stage was theirs forever, that your devotion was a permanent part of their identity. But now, they're standing in the dark, confused and cold, no longer the recipient of your radiant energy. That's the pain they never anticipated, the disappearance of a light they assumed belonged to them. In Stoic relationships, there comes a time when we must question, is our energy being honored or consumed? You gave everything not as a strategy, but as a natural extension of your character. You stood by them through uncertainty, through moments of distance and silence. You gave without a ledger, supported without demand. But the tragedy lies in how they interpreted your loyalty, not as a gift, but as a given. And when people begin to treat something sacred as expected, they lose the ability to cherish it. That's what happened. They didn't realize the privilege of being seen by someone who didn't need to be impressed, someone who loved them without condition. And while they wandered off chasing shadows, you stood still, you waited, you tried, but even patience has a breaking point. And when that point arrived, it wasn't thunderous, it was quiet. You turned away from the stage. You stopped clapping for their half-effort. You stepped out of the role of emotional cheerleader and back into your truth. And that's when the spotlight shifted. They noticed it slowly. At first, they thought you were just tired, then maybe distracted. But when your eyes no longer searched for theirs in a room, when your texts stopped arriving, when your questions ceased, they realized the light had moved. That's the moment panic sets in. Not because they suddenly love you more, but because their ego, fed by constant attention, begins to starve. It wonders, where did the applause go? It searches for reflections of itself in new people, new places, new distractions, but nothing feels the same. Because the light you gave wasn't a performance, it was presence. It was real, it was earned, and now without it they're exposed. They start to perform louder, seeking validation, posting highlights, reaching for anything that might replicate the glow you once offered so effortlessly. But the crowd is different now. The audience doesn't respond the way you did, because no one clapped for them like you did. No one celebrated their smallest wins with the same authenticity. And that's when the absence begins to sting. Not like a wound, but like a shadow, always there, always reminding. Your silence, your withdrawal, your peace, it reflects back their arrogance. And in that reflection, they see someone who mistook love for attention, who confused access for permanence. Stoicism teaches us not to attach our worth to fleeting moments or the applause of others. And in walking away, you did just that. You detached not because you stopped loving them, but because you started loving yourself more. And that shift is irreversible, because once you realize that your spotlight is sacred, you stop giving it to those who only want to stand in it without earning it. That's what they're learning now, that you were not just warmth, they were simply cold without you. You weren't their light, you were your own, and they were lucky enough to be illuminated by it for a while. But luck runs out when taken. For granted, now they post, they party, they pretend. But behind every laugh is a longing. Behind every highlight reel is a hidden regret. They can't admit it, not out loud, but they know. The energy they once felt has shifted, and it's not coming back. That's not your fault. That's their consequence. And while they may act indifferent, their silence is not peace, it's noise. It's filled with the echoes of what they threw away, and every room they enter now feels colder. Not because the world changed, but because your light is no longer there. You're not the bitter ex, the dramatic departure, the loud goodbye. You're the one who left the stage without announcing it, and in doing so, you took the audience with you. Because people don't follow performances, they follow presence, and now your presence is felt in your absence. That's what Stoic wisdom teaches us, that true power lies not in reaction, but in restraint. And your restraint, your refusal to beg or return or explain, has become the loudest part of the story. They thought the show would go on, but it didn't. The lights are dim, the applause has faded, and the seat where you once sat remains empty. And no matter how many people they invite, how loud the music plays, how bright the spotlights burn, it's not the same. Because the show was never about them. It was about the connection, the depth, the truth, and without you, there is none. So now they sit in the dark, wondering what went wrong. And the answer isn't complex. The spotlight didn't move because you changed. It moved because you grew. And growth, real growth, doesn't need an audience. It happens in silence. It glows from within. It radiates in new directions. You're not punishing them. You're just done performing. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not missing. They're just finally noticing. And that's the twist they never expected, that you wouldn't just survive without them. You'd shine. And now, every time they feel unseen, every time they feel small, every time they crave the kind of support you used to offer, they remember, not out of love, out of loss, out of realization, because they didn't just lose you, they lost the only spotlight that ever felt real. And no matter how far they run, no matter how many stages they step on, they'll always look for your light in the crowd. But you're not in the crowd anymore. You're on your own stage, living your own truth, shining without apology. And that's the most powerful spotlight of all. That's what Stoicism teaches us about relationships. When you stop performing, you start living. And when you start living, those who only knew the version of you built around them get left in the dark. 4. The flame that refused to burn out. They thought walking away would extinguish you. They thought that your light, your warmth, your attention, your loyalty was a fire they could put out simply by removing their presence. But they misunderstood something critical. You were never their candle. You were your own flame. And real fire doesn't die when someone leaves. It transforms, it evolves, it learns how to burn in silence, how to consume pain without rage, how to convert heartbreak into heat. That's the kind of fire Stoicism teaches us to be. Not the reckless kind that lashes out when hurt, but the steady, enduring fire that survives in stillness and emerges stronger. Imagine the moment they turned their back, thinking the chapter had ended. They expected to return one day and find you flickering, barely lit, desperate for their spark again. But what they didn't calculate was your resilience. They didn't know that everything they thought would break you would instead ignite you. That every unanswered question, every abandoned moment, every quiet betrayal, they became the fuel. And with each passing day of silence, you didn't dim. You blazed. You became something they never imagined, untouchable. Because fire like yours doesn't go out. It finds a new form. A new direction, a new purpose. That's the power of someone who stops needing external validation to feel alive. And when someone finally stops depending on another to feel seen, that's when they start becoming unstoppable. That's what happened to you. You didn't seek revenge, you sought peace. But peace, in its purest form, is disruptive to those who left you expecting chaos. While they waited for a breakdown, you built something. While they scrolled for signs of your collapse, you were rising from the ashes. Not loudly, not publicly, but profoundly. And now they feel it. The heat, the absence, the shift. They feel it in the way no one else matches your energy. They feel it in the emptiness that no distraction can numb. They feel it in the chill of moments that once felt warm, simply because your presence was the flame that softened their world. They feel it in the way every new connection seems to fall flat, because no one burns with the same soul you did. And this isn't about comparison. This is about reality. Stoic relationships don't seek to dominate or control. They seek truth. They honor presence. And when someone disrespects a truth as rare as yours, the fire doesn't disappear. It simply stops warming them. And that's what haunts them now. You didn't rage, you didn't beg, you didn't try to convince them of your worth. You just lit your own path and walked it. That scares people who rely on your dependence. They realize too late that the person they thought needed them for warmth was actually the source all along. And now, from the distance, they can't replicate that heat. They can't fake it. They can't find it in quick flings or hollow praise or superficial validation. Because your energy wasn't just affection, it was transformation. It was a space where they were seen, accepted, understood. And that kind of space can't be replaced. They thought they were the spark, but they were only ever near the flame. You were the fire. And now they watch as you expand into new passions, new peace, new power. You're not the version of yourself they remember. You're wiser, stronger, more grounded. You've embraced Stoicism not as a shield, but as a philosophy of movement, of choosing progress over reaction, growth over guilt. You're no longer explaining, you're evolving. You're no longer mourning what left, you're illuminating what remains. And what remains is everything: your spirit, your dignity, your inner fire. They expected you to stay still, but you didn't. You burned through their absence and emerged brighter. And while they try to understand what happened, replaying old conversations, wondering where it shifted, you already know the answer. It wasn't a moment, it was a choice, a slow, consistent choice to stop shrinking yourself to fit someone else's comfort zone. A decision to no longer offer your light to someone who refused to stand in it fully. And that choice is permanent, because once you've learned how to burn without them, you never go back to begging for matches. You don't look to be reignited. You become your own spark, and now the world feels that glow. It's not just your energy, it's your presence. It's your refusal to be dimmed, and that energy becomes magnetic. It draws in people who see you not as a source to drain, but as a force to honor. That's the shift. That's the revolution of the self. And that's what they missed out on. You weren't someone who needed saving. You were someone becoming. And now that you've become what they never imagined you could be, whole without them, they're left to reckon with the truth. The fire they tried to walk away from wasn't something they could replace. It was once in a lifetime. It was the rare kind of love that asks nothing but gives everything. And when that kind of love is mistreated, it doesn't disappear. It transforms. It returns to its source. They will miss it, they will search for it, but they will never control it again. Because that flame is sacred now. It doesn't burn for attention, it burns for purpose. That's what Stoicism teaches, as not to harden, but to endure, not to react, but to radiate, not to seek approval, but to honor truth. And your truth is this: you are no longer asking to be chosen. You have chosen yourself. You have fed your own fire. And no one, not even those who once knew your spark, can dim you now. So if this message resonates, if you've felt this shift in yourself, this quiet blaze that's slowly become your strength, then show it. Like this video and comment #1 below if you know you are the fire they couldn't contain. And if you want more of this energy, more stoicism, more truth, more insights into the kind of stoic relationships that transform rather than trap, subscribe now. We're building something powerful here. And you, right now, are proof that no flame dies when it's fueled by truth. 5. The crown. They dropped without realizing its worth. It's one thing to lose something and feel regret. It's another to realize what you lost was priceless and that you dropped it not by accident, but by ignorance. That's what happens when someone mishandles a heart like yours. You weren't just present, you were loyal. You weren't just kind, you were consistent. You weren't just there, you were committed. But because you didn't demand attention, because you didn't shine for show, they mistook your quiet power for ordinary presence. And that mistake has consequences. They thought they had time. They thought they had options. They thought your worth was negotiable. But now, standing in the aftermath of their own indifference, they're finally beginning to understand. You were the crown, And the moment they dropped you, not with force, but with carelessness, that was the moment everything began to shift. You see, true value isn't loud. It's not boastful. It doesn't scream for validation. It simply exists, grounded and clear. And those who are wise enough to see it, treat it with reverence. But those who are blind to it, those ruled by ego, by distraction, by the illusion of better, they misplace it. They chase temporary thrills, assuming the crown will always be there. But you were not there to be collected. You were not a prize for display. You were a partner, a soul, a presence that elevated everything around them. And now, that elevation is gone. They don't feel it in the big things. They feel it in the quiet, when the day ends and the noise fades, when they reach for the comfort you once gave so effortlessly and it's no longer there. When their new connections fall short, not because those people lack something, but because you had everything they didn't know how to appreciate. You didn't announce your departure. You simply stopped lowering your standards. And that silence, that dignity, that truth, it stripped them of the illusion that your presence was eternal. Because even loyalty has limits, even unconditional. Love requires respect, and Stoicism teaches us we must not attach our worth to how others treat us. We must embody our value, and if someone fails to see it, we must walk without bitterness. That's what you did, not with revenge, not with resentment, but with clarity. And now, they live with the memory of a crown they can no longer wear. They remember the way you supported them when no one else saw their potential. They remember the way your words gave them courage. They remember the way your presence made even ordinary moments feel profound. And that remembering, it doesn't fade. Because no matter how much time passes, the soul knows when it's lost something rare. They see you rising now, but from a distance. They hear about your peace, your glow, your energy. But it's no longer theirs to access. That's the reality of those who drop the crown. They never forget the weight of what they once held, and they never stop searching for it in others. But you were never meant to be searched for. You were meant to be seen. And now that you've reclaimed your throne, not out of pride, but out of self-respect, they're forced to reckon with the truth. You were never asking to be chosen. You were showing what it meant to be sacred, but they needed to lose you to understand that. And now, as they sit with that truth, they realize something deeper. The love you gave wasn't naive, it was noble. The patience you showed wasn't weakness, it was grace. The forgiveness you offered wasn't desperation, it was wisdom. And that wisdom now belongs to someone who sees you clearly. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually they'll encounter someone who holds space for them the way you once did. And it won't feel the same, because that space won't be built from loyalty, it'll be built from lack. They'll know it's different, they'll know it's transactional, and in that knowing your memory will rise, not as a comparison but as a contrast. Because what you gave wasn't just love, it was legacy, and Stoic relationships are built on that. Legacy, not on ego, not on need, but on truth. You were the truth, and now you've returned to yourself. That's the arc of real healing, not becoming bitter, not shutting down, but elevating. And in that elevation, your energy has changed. You don't need to speak on what happened. You don't need to prove you were worthy. Your evolution is the evidence. Your peace is the proof, and they feel it, whether they admit it or not. In every moment of silence, in every failed connection, in every dream they wish they could unwrite, you're there, not as someone waiting, but as someone unreachable. Because crowns don't chase, they don't convince, they don't compete, they rest on the heads of those who understand their worth. And now that you've remembered yours, you've become what they never expected, irreplaceable. That's not ego, that's essence, and that essence can't be mimicked, it can't be found again, because it came from a place of selflessness, depth, and real devotion. And people don't forget that, they live with it, they measure against it, and they quietly wonder why no one else feels like home. But you were never a place to stay temporarily. You were a home they left, thinking they'd find better, only to learn that not every door opens again, and this one won't. Because now you're guarding your peace, your energy, your love, not out of fear, but out of honor. And that's the power of knowing your value. It doesn't make you cold, it makes you careful. You no longer invest in those who only know how to spend. You no longer explain to those who only listen to respond. You no longer shrink for those who refuse to grow. You've stepped fully into your light, and in that light, the crown is visible, not to everyone, but to those with the eyes to see. And from this moment on, only those who come with clarity, with commitment, with consistency, only they will get close. Because now you know, being the crown is not about being chosen, it's about choosing wisely. And you've chosen yourself. 6. The ghost that lives in their regret. It's not the loud losses that haunt people, it's the quiet ones, the ones that vanish with dignity, without confrontation, without a dramatic final word. That's what you've become now. Not a memory, not an echo, but a presence they can't escape. A ghost, not born of death, but of transformation. The version of you they knew, the one who waited, forgave, hoped, that version no longer exists, but its imprint remains. They walk through familiar places and hear your laughter in corners of their mind. They reread old messages not because they miss you, but because they're trying to recreate a connection they shattered with their own hands. But you're not there anymore, not in that energy, not in that form. And what they feel isn't longing, it's regret, deep, persistent, suffocating regret. Because when someone loses a person who genuinely saw them, supported them, stood beside them, even when they weren't deserving, it doesn't just sting, it reshapes them, but not right away. At first, they distract themselves. They pretend your silence is temporary. They assume you're just healing, taking space, leaving the door cracked open. But then the days turn into weeks. The space doesn't close. The messages don't come. And in the stillness of their own world, they begin to realize you're not lingering. You've left, not physically maybe, but energetically, emotionally, spiritually. And now, they are left to face the hollow place where your presence once lived. That's when you become the ghost. The moment they recognize you've evolved past them, that you no longer seek closure, that you no longer look back, that's when they start to feel haunted, not by your memory, but by their choices. Stoicism teaches us that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond. And your response, silent, sovereign, steady, is the most powerful haunting of all. Because it doesn't come with punishment, it comes with a lesson. You didn't wish them harm, you didn't seek to hurt them. You simply stopped being available for the cycle, and that boundary, that elevation, that reclaiming of self, it echoes, it ripples into their solitude, into their failed connections, into their quietest moments. And with every new person they meet, with every laugh that doesn't land, with every hug that feels a little too hollow, they feel it. You, the ghost of who they could have had if they'd been ready, if they'd been honest, if they'd been brave. But they weren't. They ran, or they lied, or they chose convenience over depth. And that decision, casual in the moment, now lives in their bones. Because you weren't replaceable. And no matter how many people they meet, they carry your energy as a benchmark, not because you haunt them intentionally, but because real love leaves fingerprints on the soul. And those marks don't fade with time. They deepen, they ache, and they become the measuring stick for everything that comes next. That's what happens when someone walks away from a rare connection. It doesn't vanish, it calcifies into their conscience. And now, when they think of you, it's not with certainty, it's with a million questions they'll never get to ask. Because the version of you they remember, the one who would have answered, is gone. You've risen. You've stepped fully into the Stoic principle that says your peace is not negotiable. And now they're stuck in a loop of their own making, a loop of what if and if only, and I didn't know. But the truth is, they did know. Maybe not consciously, but deep down, we all feel when we're being given something sacred. We feel the loyalty that doesn't waver, the love that doesn't wane, the consistency that doesn't ask for attention. It just shows up. And they felt all of it, but they chose to ignore it, to believe it would always be there, that they could come back when they were ready. But the door didn't just close, it disappeared. Because when someone evolves in silence, they don't just outgrow the past, they transcend it. And you've transcended the version of yourself that made excuses for their absence, that tried to prove your worth, that held space for someone who refused to show up. That person, the one who lived with their heart in their hands, is no longer here. And what remains is someone who doesn't beg to be understood, who doesn't seek to be remembered, who doesn't need closure to move forward. Because closure in Stoicism is not given, it's created. And you created yours not through confrontation, but through growth, through acceptance, through the unshakable decision to no longer participate in your own pain. That's what haunts them now, the fact that they never got the chance to say goodbye, because you didn't leave with a storm, you left with grace. And that kind of departure, it lingers. It settles into their lungs and makes every breath a little heavier. It lingers in their reflection, reminding them not of what they lost, but of what they failed to protect. And that's a different kind of grief. It's not just sadness, it's shame. It's the shame of knowing they were handed something real, something rare, and they dropped it not because it broke, but because they were careless. And now they live with the aftertaste of their own apathy. You didn't ask for that, you didn't want that, but your healing, your silence, your return to self, that's the justice. Not that they're hurting, but that you're free, that you no longer carry the weight of their potential, that you've stopped waiting for someone who already showed you who they are, and in that decision, you've become untouchable, not in arrogance, in clarity. And while they spend nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if you ever think of them, the truth is you don't in the same way. You remember, perhaps, you honor what was, but you no longer yearn, you no longer ache. You no longer revisit the past, searching for meaning, because you found your meaning in the aftermath. You found your truth in the absence. You found your fire in the silence. And now they can only watch from a distance, trapped in the consequence of choices they made with eyes wide open. That's the ghost you've become, not one that asks for attention, but one that lives in every quiet regret, in every empty bed, in every song that used to make sense, in every missed call they'll never get to make, because the ghost isn't you, it's who they were with you. And that version of them no longer exists either, because the one who could have had you, held you, healed with you, that person died the moment they walked away. And in that death, you were reborn. So if you feel this message, if you've ever become the echo in someone's life, not by clinging, but by rising, then like this video and comment number 1 below. And if you want more truths like this, if you're building yourself around the wisdom of Stoicism and ready to thrive in Stoic relationships, then subscribe now. This space is for your evolution, your power, your healing. Welcome home. Silence is not the absence of feeling, it is the mastery of it. And in mastering it, you've reclaimed something far more valuable than attention. You've reclaimed yourself. You no longer measure your worth by who stays or who apologizes. You've moved beyond needing validation from people who couldn't hold space for your depth. What you've built now is untouchable, not because it's hidden, but because it's sacred. This journey wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about remembering who you were before the world taught you to chase, to beg, to prove. It was about honoring your energy, about treating your own soul with the reverence you once reserved for others. And now you stand not in bitterness, but in balance, not in fear, but in fire, not as someone broken, but as someone whole. This isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of your most powerful chapter. A chapter where silence speaks louder than pleading, where distance restores dignity, where solitude sharpens your vision. And in this new beginning, the people who left are no longer your focus. They're your past. Let them obsess over what they lost. Let them sit with the silence they created. Let them live with the memory of the version of you they'll never see again. Because now your path is clear. You are no longer explaining. You are no longer waiting. You are no longer playing small in someone else's story. You are the author. You are the fire. And your silence, it will echo forever, not as pain, but as power.